I knew something was wrong before anyone said a word. The ballroom was too perfect, too polished, too controlled. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, casting soft light across rows of round tables dressed in white linen. A string quartet played near the stage, their music light and elegant, the kind meant to fill silence without drawing attention. Waiters moved through the room with silver trays, offering champagne and small, delicate bites. Everything looked expensive, intentional, impeccable, and yet, the moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The shift. Conversations didn't stop, but they changed. Voices dropped half a level, laughter became tighter, shorter. Eyes moved not away from me, but toward me, then quickly elsewhere, as if they had already seen what they needed to see. It wasn't curiosity, it was recognition. Like I had walked into a story that had already been told about me. I adjusted the strap of my navy dress and forced myself to keep walking. Each step felt measured, deliberate, like I was crossing into something I didn't fully understand yet. I scanned the room for a familiar face. Not because I expected comfort, but because I needed orientation. Page. My father's voice came from my left. I turned. He stood near the bar, posture straight, expression carefully neutral. His suit was perfectly tailored, his tie aligned with the same precision he applied to everything in his life. Dad, I said. He gave a small nod. Glad you could make it. No smile. No movement closer. No attempt to close the space between us. I wouldn't miss it, I replied. The words felt hollow even as I said them. We stood there for a moment, facing each other like two professionals at a networking event who vaguely recognized one another but had nothing meaningful to say. Before the silence could stretch any further, Madison appeared. She looked exactly like the bride she had always imagined being. Every detail of her was flawless. Her hair fell in soft, controlled waves. Her makeup was precise, enhancing every feature without appearing heavy. The dress fit her like it had been designed around her body alone. She smiled the moment she saw me. Paige, she said, stepping forward and wrapping her arms around me. The hug was brief. Light, careful, not warmth, not connection, just performance. You came, she added, pulling back. Of course, I said. You're my sister. She studied my face for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Then her expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Did you bring the paperwork? She asked. The question landed clean and sharp. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. The paperwork? Her smile didn't change. For the penthouse, she said lightly. Mom said you'd have it ready. Something inside me went still. Not confused. Not surprised. Just clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the plan. No, I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. What do you mean? I mean, there is no paperwork, I said. There's nothing to sign. The music continued behind us. Glasses clinked. Conversations carried on. But between us, everything shifted into a different space entirely. Madison leaned closer, lowering her voice. We already told people, she said. About something that doesn't belong to you, I replied. Her jaw tightened. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw it frustration, sharp and immediate. You don't even need it, she said. You don't use it the way we would. What's the point of you having it? The words felt familiar in a way I couldn't immediately place. Not new. Just clearer than before. I didn't answer, because I understood now that the answer had never mattered to her. She leaned in even closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. Mom's going to handle this, she said. Then she straightened, her smile returning instantly, and turned away, moving gracefully toward a group of bridesmaids who greeted her with excitement and admiration. I stood there for a second longer than I should have. Not frozen, not overwhelmed, just recalibrating. Then I turned and walked toward the balcony. The moment I stepped outside, the cold air hit my skin, sharp and grounding. I drew in a slow breath, letting it settle in my chest. Inside, everything had felt compressed, controlled, directed. Out here, it was real. My phone buzzed in my hand. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. I answered immediately. Hi, I said. Tell me what's happening, my grandmother replied. Her voice was steady, focused. I glanced back through the glass doors at the ballroom, at the movement, the light, the people who were no longer just guests, but witnesses. They think I'm going to give it to her, I said. There was a brief pause. Of course they do, she said. No surprise. No hesitation, just confirmation. Paige, she continued, listen to me carefully. If something happens tonight, and it will, I need you to remember the number I gave you. My grip tightened slightly around the phone. I remember, I said. If they push you, she said, you call him immediately. The wind moved around me, lifting a strand of my hair across my face. What are you not telling me? I asked. For a moment there was only silence on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, more than I should have. I closed my eyes briefly, letting that settle. Just don't sign anything, she added. No matter what they say, no matter who's watching. I opened my eyes and looked back at the room again. At my family. At the stage I hadn't realized I was walking into. I won't, I said. When I stepped back inside, something had changed. Not the room, not the people, me. Because now I understood. This wasn't a celebration. It was a performance. And I had already been cast in a role I never agreed to. Play. 3 years earlier, none of this had felt like a trap. It had felt simple. A phone call. A decision. A gift. I was sitting in my small studio apartment, eating leftover takeout and reviewing design plans, when my phone lit up with my grandmother's name. Paige, she said when I answered, her voice as steady and precise as ever. I'm updating my will. I remember pausing, setting my fork down slowly. Okay, I said. There was no hesitation in her tone. I'm leaving you the penthouse. The words didn't fully register at first. The penthouse? I repeated. The one on Seaport Boulevard, she clarified. Yes, I leaned back in my chair, trying to process it. Why me? I asked. Not because I didn't want it, because I needed to understand. Because you show up, she said. That was all. No long explanation. No emotional speech. Just a simple statement of fact. You come every Sunday, she continued. You sit with me. You listen. You remember things that matter to me. I swallowed, suddenly aware of the tightness in my chest. That's not something people do out of obligation, she added. That's something they choose. The paperwork was finalized within a month. Everything was legal, clear, documented. And somehow, within weeks, my family knew. I never found out how, but I saw the result. My mother called what she described as a family discussion. The moment I walked into her living room, I understood the structure. 3 seats facing one. My father in his chair. My mother on the sofa. Madison positioned just slightly above them, perched like she belonged at the center of it all. And one empty chair. For me. Paige, my mother said, her voice smooth, almost warm. We need to talk about your grandmother's condition. I sat down slowly. Her condition? I asked. She's not thinking clearly, she replied. This decision isn't rational. I looked at her, trying to understand how easily she said it. She gave me something she wanted me to have, I said. That's her choice. Madison exhaled sharply, like I had just inconvenienced her. This is so unfair, she said. I turned toward her. Unfair? I've always loved Grandma, she continued. I just don't have time to visit every week like you do. I have a life. The words were carefully chosen, positioned to make me sound obsessive. Small. My father finally spoke, his tone measured and controlled. The reasonable solution, he said, would be for you to decline the inheritance, or at least sell the property and divide it equally. I stared at him, at the man who had missed most of my life, but suddenly had strong opinions about what was fair. I'm not declining anything. I said. And I'm not selling it. The room shifted instantly. The warmth disappeared. My mother's expression hardened. Then you need to understand, she said. There will be consequences. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The consequences didn't come all at once. They came slowly, quietly. First, I stopped hearing about things. Family dinners, gatherings, events. Then I stopped being invited entirely. Birthdays passed without messages. Holidays happened without acknowledgement. It wasn't loud rejection, it was erasure. And then came the stories. At first, I only heard fragments. A comment here. A look there. Then I overheard it directly. Paige manipulated her. My mother was saying to someone at a gathering I hadn't been invited to but had shown up to anyway. She was always there, pushing, influencing. You know how vulnerable older people can be. I stood just out of sight, listening. She turned her against the rest of the family, she added. The tone was soft, concerned, convincing. It was a narrative, and it was working. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct her. I told myself it would pass, that the truth didn't need to be defended. That silence was strength. I didn't realize silence was exactly what she needed. The first time I noticed something was wrong with my grandmother was months later. She had moved into a senior living facility. When I asked her, why, she smiled. I wanted peace, she said. But sometimes, when she thought I wasn't paying attention, I saw something else in her expression. A hesitation, a flicker of something that didn't belong there. Did something happen? I asked her once. She looked out the window for a long moment before answering. Some things are better left alone, she said quietly. I accepted that answer. I told myself it wasn't my place to push. Looking back, I understand what I missed. The distance, the silence, the way everything in my family shifted around a story that wasn't true but was never challenged. By the time the wedding invitation arrived, 2 years had passed like that. 2 years of being outside something I had once believed I belonged to. The envelope was thick, formal, carefully written. Inside was a simple message, a date, a location, a request for my presence. No acknowledgement of the past, no apology, just expectation. My phone rang later that evening. Paige, my mother said, her tone suddenly warm again. Did you receive the invitation? I did, I replied. Good, she said. This is a chance for the family to come together again. I waited. And, she added, it would be the perfect moment to revisit the penthouse situation. There it was, clear, direct, unavoidable. They'll need a place to live, she continued. Something appropriate. They can find one, I said. The warmth vanished instantly. I expect you to think carefully, she said. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time after that call ended, because I understood now. This wasn't reconciliation. It was strategy. And whatever was going to happen at that wedding had already been planned. I didn't answer the invitation right away. I left it on my desk for 2 days, unopened after the first read, like it might change if I gave it time. It didn't. The date stayed the same. The expectation stayed the same. And the feeling in my chest tight. Unresolved didn't go anywhere either. I understood the position I was in. If I went, I would be walking into something controlled by my mother. A room full of people who had already heard her version of the story. A situation designed to pressure me into compliance. If I didn't go, it would confirm everything she had been saying. That I was selfish, that I was hiding, that I had something to be ashamed of. Either way, the outcome would be shaped without me. Unless I chose to be there. Unless I chose to stand in it. That was the only variable I could still control. So I picked up my phone and RSVP'd yes. The confirmation. Email arrived within seconds. Short, polite, final. 1 week before the wedding, my phone rang at 7 a.m. I knew who it was before I answered. Paige, my grandmother said, her voice carrying a kind of urgency I hadn't heard from her before. I need you to listen carefully. I sat up in bed immediately. I'm listening. If something happens at that wedding, she said, and I believe something will, I want you to call Marcus Webb. She gave me the number slowly, repeating it twice until I confirmed I had written it down. "Grandma," I said, "what's going to happen?" A pause, longer than usual. "Your mother believes I don't know what she's planning," she said. My stomach tightened. "What is she planning?" "I don't know the exact details," she replied, "but I know how she operates. She needs an audience. She needs witnesses." I could hear something beneath her words. Not fear, something closer to certainty. "I've prepared everything," she continued. "Marcus has all the documents. If you need them, they're ready." "Documents for what?" Another pause. "Just remember the number," she said. "And remember that you are not alone." She hung up before I could press further. I sat there, the phone still in my hand, the number written in uneven ink on the edge of a notebook. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I understood enough. Something had been set in motion long before this wedding, something I had only been seeing from the outside. On the day of the wedding, I got ready slowly, deliberately. Not because I wanted to impress anyone in that room, but because I needed to feel like myself before I walked into something designed to make me feel small. I chose a navy dress. Simple. Structured. Not too expensive, not too understated. Something that couldn't be easily turned into a statement about me. Something that belonged to me alone. When I arrived at the hotel, the building itself felt like a statement. Tall, historic, imposing. The kind of place where everything echoed slightly, like the walls were used to holding important conversations. Inside, the ballroom was already full. I counted the tables without meaning to, not because I cared about the number, but because it helped me focus on something concrete. 127 guests, each one a potential witness, each one a piece of the environment my mother had carefully built. I recognized more faces than I expected. Attorneys, judges, people connected to my family in ways that extended beyond personal relationships into professional networks. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a stage with consequences. As the evening progressed, the pattern became clearer. People approached me with polite smiles and carefully worded questions. "I've heard so much about you. You've been taking care of your grandmother, right? That must be a big responsibility." Each comment carried an assumption. Each question was shaped by something they had already been told. I answered briefly. Neutral. Controlled. Not correcting, not engaging, just observing. Because the more I listened, the more I understood. My mother hadn't just told a story. She had built a narrative, one that positioned me as temporary, as a placeholder, as someone holding something that would eventually be redistributed in a more appropriate way. The realization settled into me slowly. This wasn't going to be a private conversation. Whatever she had planned, it was meant to happen in front of all of them. The speeches began after dinner. My father spoke first. His words were formal, measured, filled with references to legacy and family values, concepts he had rarely applied in practice, but delivered with practiced ease. Madison's maid of honor followed, telling light stories that made the room laugh. Tyler's father spoke last, framing the marriage as a union between two established families. A merger, almost. I sat at my table, listening, watching, waiting, because I knew now that something was coming. Not if, when. The shift happened when my mother stood. She picked up her glass first, tapping it lightly to draw attention. The sound cut cleanly through the room. Then she reached for the microphone. Her posture was perfect, her expression warm, controlled, every detail of her presentation aligned with the image she had spent years maintaining. "If I could have everyone's attention," she said, her voice carrying easily across the room. The conversations quieted. The focus shifted, exactly as she intended. "I'd like to take a moment for something very special," she continued. There was a slight pause, just long enough to create anticipation. "A family tradition," she added. I felt it then. That same feeling I had when I first walked into the room. The sense that something had already been decided, that I was about to be pulled into a moment that wasn't really mine. Her eyes moved across the crowd. Then they landed on me, and stayed there. "Paige," she said, smiling. Would you come up here for a moment? Every head in the room turned toward my table. 127 people. Watching. Waiting. Not for what I would choose, for what they believed I would do. I didn't move right away, not because I was unsure, but because I understood now exactly what this moment was. And, once I stepped into it, there would be no stepping back out. For a moment, I stayed exactly where I was. Not frozen, not uncertain, just aware. Of the room, of the eyes on me, of the fact that whatever happened next had already been shaped in everyone else's mind. Then I stood, because not standing would still be a choice, and it would still be used against me. So I walked, slowly, steadily, through rows of tables, past faces that watched with interest, disguised as politeness. I could feel the attention building as I moved closer to the stage, like a current I was stepping into rather than away from. By the time I reached her, the room was completely quiet. My mother placed her hand on my shoulder the moment I stepped beside her. Light pressure. Controlled. A gesture meant to look affectionate. It didn't feel like that. "Here she is," she said warmly into the microphone. A few people smiled. Some even nodded, as if they were witnessing something meaningful. "Paige has been entrusted with something very special," my mother continued. "Something that represents not just value, but family legacy." I didn't look at her. I looked at the crowd, because I wanted to see how many of them already believed what she was about to say. "A beautiful penthouse," she said, left to her by her grandmother. There it was. A ripple moved through the room. Recognition. Confirmation. This wasn't new information to them. "Now," she continued, her tone softening just enough to suggest generosity, "Paige has always been responsible. Careful. Thoughtful." I almost smiled. Not because it was true, but because of how precisely she was setting the frame. "She's been holding on to that property," my mother went on, "waiting for the right moment to share it with the people who matter most." The room leaned into her words. Not physically, but in attention. Expectation. "And what better moment," she said, turning slightly toward me, "than tonight?" She reached for a folder resting on the table beside her and lifted it with a smooth, practiced motion. "I've prepared everything," she said. She opened it and angled it just enough so I could see. Documents. Multiple pages. Typed, structured. Final. My name already printed where the signature would go. "All Paige needs to do," she said into the microphone, "is sign." There was a pause, just long enough for the moment to settle. Then, softly, the room responded. A few claps at first, then more. Not loud, not overwhelming, but enough. Enough to frame this as something positive, something expected, something already decided. I took the folder from her hands, not because I was considering it, but because I needed to feel it. The weight of it, the reality of what she had done. I closed it gently. Then I looked at her. "No," I said. The word cut through the room cleanly. The clapping stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. My mother's smile didn't change. Not immediately. "Don't be nervous," she said lightly. "I'm not nervous," I replied. "I'm not signing." The shift this time was sharper, more visible. Madison stepped closer, her expression tightening in a way she couldn't fully hide. "You're really doing this?" she said. "I didn't ask to be part of this," I said. "You're ruining everything," she snapped. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not giving away something that isn't yours." The words landed differently now, because the room was listening, not assuming. Listening. My mother's hand tightened on my shoulder. Subtle, but firm enough to register. "Paige," she said, her voice lower now, though still carried by the microphone. "This is not the time to be difficult." "I'm not being difficult," I said. "I'm being clear." A murmur moved through the crowd. Not loud, but present. Something was shifting. Not in my favor yet, but no longer entirely in hers. Madison stepped forward again, her voice sharper now. "You're choosing an apartment over your own family," she said. "I'm choosing what was given to me." I replied. You don't even need it, she said. That doesn't make it yours, I said. The tension in the room thickened. People shifted in their seats. Some looked away, others leaned in. My mother's composure cracked just slightly. After everything we've done for you, she said, her voice rising, you can't do this one thing? I turned to face her fully. You didn't do anything for me, I said. The words were quiet, but they carried. You didn't support me, I continued. You didn't show up. And you didn't raise me. A sharp intake of breath moved through the room. This wasn't part of her script. This wasn't controlled. This was real. For a second, everything stopped. Then her hand moved. Fast, sharp, final. The impact snapped my head to the side. The sound echoed, not loud, but clear enough that no one could pretend it hadn't happened. My ear rang. Heat spread across my cheek, and something small hit the floor beside me. My earring. For a moment, I didn't move. Not because I couldn't, because I needed that moment to choose what happened next. Then I bent down, slowly, carefully. I picked it up from the floor, straightened it between my fingers, and put it back in place. When I looked up again, the room was completely silent, every eye on me, waiting, not for what she would do, for what I would do. That's the last time you touch me, I said. My voice didn't shake. That mattered more than anything else in that moment. I handed the folder back to her, not forcefully, not dramatically, just done. Then I turned and walked off the stage. No rush, no hesitation, just a straight line toward the exit. I didn't look back. Not at her, not at Madison, not at anyone, because I already knew what I needed to do next. And for the first time that night, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. I didn't stop walking until I reached the lobby. The sound of the ballroom faded behind me, replaced by something quieter, controlled, neutral, a space that didn't belong to them. I found a bench near the far wall and sat down slowly, my hands resting in my lap. My cheek still burned, but the pain felt distant, less important than the clarity settling in around it. I reached into my bag and took out my phone. There was only one number I needed. I dialed it without hesitation. It rang. Once. Marcus Webb's office, a voice answered. This is Paige, I said. Please tell her. The documents are needed. There was no confusion on the other end. No questions. Understood, the voice replied. She'll be there. The line went quiet. I lowered the phone and sat back. No rush, no panic, just waiting. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to anticipate what would happen next. I wasn't trying to adjust, or soften, or manage someone else's reaction. I had made my decision. Everything else would follow. Time passed. Slowly. Or maybe it only felt that way because I was finally still. Eventually, the doors at the far end of the lobby opened, and she walked in. My grandmother moved carefully, supported by a cane, her pace slower than I remembered, but everything else about her remained unchanged. Her posture, her presence, the quiet authority that filled the space around her without effort. Beside her walked a man I didn't know, carrying a briefcase. I stood immediately. Grandma, I said. She stepped toward me, her eyes moving over my face, taking in everything. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. She reached up and touched my cheek gently. He hit you? She asked. She did, I said. Something in her expression hardened. Not anger, not exactly. Something colder, more precise. Then let's finish this, she said. We walked back into the ballroom together. The atmosphere had changed completely. Conversations were no longer polite or controlled. Clusters of people stood close together, speaking in low, urgent tones. My mother stood near the center of the room, her posture rigid, her expression strained. She turned when she heard movement behind her, and for the first time that night, she looked uncertain. What are you doing here? She demanded. My grandmother didn't raise her voice. I came to correct something, she said. The room quieted again. Not because she asked for it, because she commanded it. My name is Eleanor Harrison, she continued, her tone steady. And I am of sound mind. The words landed exactly where they needed to, a direct response to something that had been said long before tonight. The penthouse in question, she went on, belongs to Paige. It was left to her legally, by my decision. A man beside her opened the briefcase and removed a document. Certified, he said simply. The room shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough for doubt to begin. Replacing certainty. My mother shook her head. This is unnecessary, she said quickly. You're confused. No, my grandmother replied. You are. Another document appeared. This property, she said, was sold in my name 3 years ago. She paused. I did not sell it. Silence. Complete. Absolute. The kind that makes every word that follows impossible to ignore. The signature was forged, she said. The man beside her spoke again, his voice calm, measured. Forensic analysis confirms it, he said. There was no emotion in his tone, no judgment, just fact. That was enough. My father stepped back slightly, not dramatically, just enough to create distance. Madison didn't speak at all. She looked between them, her expression shifting from confusion to something closer to fear. My mother stood in the center of it all, her control unraveling in small, visible ways. No, she said. That's not. But there was nothing she could say that would reshape what had already been placed in front of everyone. Not here, not now, because this wasn't private anymore. This wasn't a story she could manage. This was truth, and it didn't need her permission to exist. My grandmother turned to me. It's done, she said. I nodded. Not because I needed confirmation, because I felt it, the shift, the end of something that had been held in place for far too long. We left the ballroom together. Not quickly, not dramatically, just completely. The noise behind us grew as we moved away. Questions, voices, movement, but none of it followed us out. Outside, the air felt different, clearer, colder, real. I stood there for a moment, letting it settle. Everything that had happened, everything that had changed. My grandmother rested her hand lightly on my arm. You did exactly what you needed to do, she said. I looked at her, at the person who had seen everything clearly, long before I had. I should have asked more questions, I said quietly. She shook her head. You learned what you needed to learn, she replied. We stood there in silence for a moment longer. Then I looked out at the street, at the city beyond the building, at everything that still existed outside of what had just ended. I'm not going back in there, I said. You don't have to, she said. And for the first time in a long time, that felt true. Months later, I stood on the balcony of the penthouse, the one that had never really been about space or value, the one that had become something else entirely. My grandmother sat beside me, a glass of wine in her hand. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to, because everything that mattered had already been said. I looked out at the city, at the quiet movement of lights and life beyond us, and I realized something I hadn't understood before. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about refusing to disappear, refusing to be rewritten, refusing to give away something that had been given to me, just because someone else decided I didn't deserve it. I took a slow breath, and for the first time in years, everything felt still, clear, mine.